Hey, good morning. We are today doing Mem Amud Aleph. What we are up to, Lamed Tes Amud Beis. Just again to review quickly the Gemara, we have a lot to do today and very little time, so we're going to have to speak a little faster. So again, the Gemara told us yesterday that there was a machlokes between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan in relation to Sisin and Shleiman. Do you make a brach on the Sisin or do you make a brach on the Shleiman? And the question, the way Rashi understood it, the machlokes between them was that in the situation where you have pieces of bread that are larger than the Shleiman, according to Rashi, Rav Huna was telling you that you make a brach on the Sisin, and Rav Yochanan was saying you make a brach on the Shleiman. According to what Taisus was learning, no. According to what Taisus was learning, if you have broken pieces, psisim, and you have shleiman, according to Rabbi Yochanan, make a bracha on the shleiman. But according to Rav Huna, you have an option. You can either make a bracha on the psisim, or you can make a bracha on the shleiman. When the Gemara says, what we did yesterday, that there was a student who was my brother Rav Ina, who was the Yerush Shamayim, was Meniach Prusa B'Seich Shlema, and then we had one of the Tani Kamed Rab Nachman Yitzchak, whose name was Salman. He was the student who said that you Meniach Prusa B'Seich Shlema in order to Mekayim Shneim. That is to say, you can Mekayim both Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan. According to the Rashi was learning, makes sense because according to the Rashi is learning when you Meniach Prusa B'Seich Shlema, you're doing both Rav Huna Shita and Rabbi Yochanan Shita because you're making a bracha on both the broken piece and on the whole. But according to the way Rabbi Yochanan, the way Rabbeinu Tam is learning Rav Huna, then it's not so clear what is the way you're being Mekayim Shneim. If you're in a situation where you're Meniach Prusa B'Seich Shlema, according to Rav Huna, you have a choice to eat either one. According to Rav Huna, you don't have to eat the prusa. You have an option. You could. So what does it mean, Nich Prusa B'Seich Shlema? So if we look, that's the Tosfos. If that is the Tosfos, which we didn't have a chance to do yesterday, Tosfos Meniach Prusa B'Seich Shlema, the second to bottom Tosfos. So according to Rashi, Pirish Rashi, B'Til Shlema, B'Til Shlema, B'Levad, V'Hainu Yidei Shten, the Kavan Sheniach Apusa Takas Shlema Nirkim, which you would say Nami Apusa, V'Davka B'Til Shlema, Avo Loy Rotz Lefarsh, B'Til Ezim Hen Shiyir So Lepusa L'Shlema. Rashi doesn't hold like Rabbeinu Tam. The Mitzvah Tech Hashlem, Mashma Hashlema Ekafine. Well, Pirish Rashi, Hachi Pusha, Yerush Shamayim Yotzi Yidei Shneim, Kidei Rav Huna, Uchidei Rabbi Yochanan, B'Sisin U'Shlema. But Ula Pirish Rabbeinu Tam, Loy Motzinu Lefarish Hachi. Why the Koya B'Sisin? Shari Einei Tzorech. Lasses Ken El Yavarch Ala Shlema V'Dai B'Kach. According to where Rav Huna learns, if you just wanted the Shlema, it's not a problem. According to where Rav Huna learns. So then. Rav Huna only says that you make a bracha on the prusa if you wanted the prusa. So it comes out better according to the way Rashi learns this line than the way Rabbeinu Tam learns. So Tais has the answer. I'm not really sure I understand Tais. Trying to explain Rabbeinu Tam. There's a different gears on the side. I'm not 100% clear. One thing I did want to note is that according to the way Rashi's learning, it comes out better. But Rashi's girsa is worse. If you look at Rashi, Meniach Prusa. Rashi doesn't say Meniach Prusa B'Seich Hashlema. What does Rashi say? Meniach Prusa Tachas Hashlema. You put the Prusa, the broken piece, underneath the whole piece. So then it comes out, then it's going to come out that you're going to have the two together, and you're going to break the bread. Oy mishtayan, oy minashlema. Either or. What do you mean? Oy mishtayan, oy minashlema. Rashi's lashon is not so glad. Or from both, or from the shlema one. What do you mean? Or from the shlema one? According to the way Rashi had explained Rav Huna before, your whole opinion of Rav Huna is that you take from the prusa, not from the shlema. So if Rashi had the girsa of besoich, I think it would have come out easier. But because he has tachas, it's harder for him to be able to make it make sense. But if Taisus has b'soich, so for Taisus, Rashi's explanation, it works out well. But Rabbeinu Tam is the question, right? But for Taisus, if he had tachas, it would come out better, right? Because then you would have potentially been able to say that the main one is the shlema that's on top, even according to Rav Huna. All right, so that was from yesterday. Today, new Gemara. So the Gemara continues. We are on Lam Testament Beis. right about 6 or 7 lines up from the bottom. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Papa Hakol Moedim, the Pesach Sheminich Prusa B'Seich Shlema. Rav Papa says that when it comes to Pesach, everyone agrees that you take the broken matzah and you put it B'Seich HaShlema. Again, I ask you, whose girsa does this work out better? Is it B'Seich? Is it B'Seich better or is it Tachatz better? And this would depend on what kind of matzah you use. If you use the matzah like the Sephardim, like Yemenite matzah, soft matzah, you can see how it could be B'Seich because it's really like pita. But the way we do it, this rikikim, like this total cardboard, you can't. How do you put it B'Seich? It only works Tachas. Okay, so leave that on the side. But anyway, what's Rav Papa saying? Rav Papa saying, everybody agrees that on Pesach, you take the broken piece of matzah and you put it by the shlema matzah, and then you make, and then you then you break them. My time, what's the reason for this? Lechem oini ksiv, because it's a word of lechem oini. We need to have the type of a lechem which aniyim would eat, which is the aniyim adarke beprusais, right? With not having whole bread. So. First, just to mention, the simple way of understanding is Rabbeinu Chananel. On the side, Rabbeinu Chananel says that although normally we say on Shabbos you have to have Lechem Mishnah, when it comes to Pesach, we're not focusing on the Lechem Mishnah. Why are we not focusing on the Lechem Mishnah? Because we are dealing with an ani. We're saying Lechem Ani, so it should be less than Lechem Mishnah, because an ani is going to have only pieces. It's going to only have not a full loaf of bread. It says the Rabbeinu Chananel, but say but prusa kemaya ani she'ein loy lechem shalom. But say but prusa but that shouldn't have lechem ani. The loy litza atarti kishar yam. You shouldn't make the brachas like you do on the 2 loaves in the normal days. Kishar yam tovim. Elo yemay mitarti. You should have less than mitarti shleim. You should have less than 2 shleimas. The tzarich b'Shabbos yam tovim that you normally require on Shabbos and Yantif. That would be the simple understanding. Now, as everybody knows, we don't. It's a whole complicated procedure, right? I brought my Haggadah. Since I'm a little kid, I had to say my Haggadah. That's why it's a little dirty about my tzimata. Now, what I wanted to read to you was what is the instructions had in my Haggadah. So the Haggadah says as follows: by Maitzi, Yikach matzahs keseder sheinichim. You should take the matzahs as you place them. Haprusa ben hashtei hashlemis. You take the broken matzah in between the 2 whole matzahs. The yoiches shloshtem biyadeh. You should hold all 3 in your hands. Shia lechem mishnah, because you're going to be mekayim lechem mishnah, right? By having 2 whole ones. Uprusa mishum lechem aini. And you should have the prusa, the broken matzah, because of lechem aini. And then you make the bracha. Uladas hagra. But according to the way the Gra learns, no, you just take 1 shlema and 1 prusa. You don't hold all 3. And then you make the bracha of hamaitzi. Then we know we have a second bracha, right? We have the bracha of achilas matzah. So what should you do by the matzah? Yaniach miyadas hamatzah tachton. According to the way this approach is, you're holding all 3. So then you put down the bottom one. So now you're only holding 2. B'yoiches bel yoinava prusa, and you hold the top matzah and the broken matzah. Right, the broken one was broken already by yachatz. V'yivarach al achilas matzah. And then you make the bracha of al achilas matzah. V'yichavim b'bracha zu al achilas hakricha v'achilas afikaimen. Right, and you have kavana on it on the eating of the matzah now and later on by the afikaimen. V'yavtzia kazayis mikol achas v'yoichlem biyachad, and you break off a kazayis from each one of the top and the middle matzah, and you eat it be'seba v'men yochel echol shteim b'vas achas. And if you're not able to eat from both, you can't eat such a big kazayis, then yochel tchila kazayis melyon, and just eat a kazayis from the top matzah. By the way, they say that kazayis here in this Haggadah, we did the shir of the kazayis, remember? So they say that the shir of the kazayis is a chatzi beh, right? It would be the sheet of Rashi and Tais. It's not like the Rambam, who would say a third of a beitzer, and certainly not like the Mishnah Berurah and the Chazon Ish and all those, based upon the slach that we talked about before, right? So he says that you should take a kazayis from the top and the middle. If you can't, just do a kazayis from the top matzah. And if you could still eat more, then take a kazayis from the prusa, from the middle matzah. You should eat it quickly, and you should not lose your kavanah. Fine. So why are we bringing this down? Bringing this down because of this Taisus over here. So the Rav Papa told us that on Pesach, what do? You take the prusa b'soicha shlema, and then you make your hamaitzi, then you make your achilas matzah. Sounding like you take the 2 together, right? You take the full matzah and you take the broken matzah. Says Taisus, bottom Taisus on the page. Mishum l'siv lechem aini, because it says lechem aini meniach prusa tachas hashlema. Notice Taisus changes b'soich, puts in tachas, right? which only makes sense according to the way we have matzah today. V'nir kibotzei laprusa, and then you'll be making hamaitzi. You'll be breaking the broken matzah. Nevertheless, says Taisus, really you should only be breaking the shalim matzah, the whole matzah. But you should make achilas matzah on the broken matzah. The karchim va'oichlem mishten yachad kidei sheyeh nira kibotzei laprusa. But you should have them attached together and like eat from both of them, so that it looks like you're breaking the and eating from the prusa matzah. V'chein minig. Aval ein lasas hamaitzi v'gam al achilas matzah min haprusa. Don't do hamaitzi and achilas matzah just on the broken matzah. The havik ha'itza mitzvahs chavilas, because that's going to be like making the mitzvahs into bundles. Venerally, the havi bracha shel nenen says Taisa, I don't really think that that's correct. This is just the regular berachas and nenen. The einam nikram chavilas. The ha akidish mevarchim kiddush and berachas yayin. Because on kiddush we have no problem making kiddush and berachas yayin on the same cup. From Menachem in Vienna, Menachem from Vienna, he would do the entirety, meaning hamaitzi and achilas matzah just on the broken matzah. And the whole matzah would only come for lechem mishnah. The re was normative that he would make the bracha of hamaitzi on both before he would break, and then he would say alachilas matzah, but say mishtan, he would break from both of them. Remember what we said is the ideal halacha. Then he would break from both of them afterwards. And it's not called chavilas because you're making the two brachas on both. Sometimes the re would leave, meaning people were at his seder and they're quoting what he did at his seder. And some years he did like this, and some years he did like that. And what he would do sometimes to leave any issue of machlekes, sometimes he would take the sholim matzah, just make hamaitzi on that one, and then he would sort of like make a little bit of a crack in it. I don't know how you make matzahs a little bit of a crack, but he'd make a little bit of a crack, but he wouldn't really separate it. Until then he would make a bracha on the broken one, matzah, and then he would break both of them. So in other words, in order to avoid the chavilas, he would take the shalim matzah for hamaitzi and achilas matzah on the prusa. So you see all the different possibilities. One of the things you notice here is where the Gra would get his right that there's only two matzahs, because nobody's saying here about the third matzah, right? We're only talking about two matzahs. Okay. But in any event, for our purposes, the fundamental idea of what Rav Papa is saying is that why is it that we are having a broken matzah? We know today because we have yachatz and all of that. But for Rav Papa's perspective, why are you doing yachatz? Is to have the children ask. It's not like a halakha yet. So Rav Papa is saying that you have to have a matzah prusa. You have to have a broken matzah over there. Why? Because of lechem aini. Lechem aini is requiring you to have a matzah the way the aniyim would have it, which is not a shalem. So in order to rekayim lechem aini, you are being beitzeah on the prusa. And since we now are going to have the question of a prusa and a shalem together, and now we're going to have this machlekes between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan. So how do you manage that? You put it together. Good. That's how it's coming out. Okay. Fine. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Abba b'Shabbos chayav adam l'tzei al shtei kikaris. But on Shabbos, says Rav Abba, you have to make your hamaitzi. You got to do it on two chalas. Why is that? My time Lechem Mishnah, right? The pasuk told us that when they went out, they didn't find the regular measure that they found every day, which is an omer. On Fridays, they got the double portion. They got a Lechem Mishnah, so we have to do it on both. Now, when Rav Abba is saying on Shabbos you mechuyev to be beitzei on shtei kikaris, does he mean you have to break both breads? It sounds like, right, if you look at the language that he says, that you have to be beitzei on both. You have to make the bracha and you have to break both breads, right? Because of the idea of Lechem Mishnah. But not everybody agrees with that. That he would hold both breads because of Lechem Mishnah, but he would only break one. He would only eat from one of the breads. Reb Zera, when he would make hamaitzi, he would essentially take off a very nice gezunta chunk from the challah, and that's what he would eat throughout the meal. Amalei Ravina Ravashi Vakam Eschazik Kira'av Suna. Sunasa. He seems like a pretty gluttonous guy, taking such a big, gigantic piece. So the question that Ravina is asking Rav Ashi is about Rav Zera. Yeah. So what did he answer? In other words, Rav Ashi is answering back to Ravina. Nobody asked Rav Zera this. Right? They're talking to themselves about what Rav Zera do at the meal. Yeah. So what do they say? Amarle came to call yom like avid hachi va'idna ka'avid le'mischaz sunasa. He doesn't seem like a glutton because he normally doesn't do this. So in other words, the gluttony is determined by what you normatively do. Since he doesn't normally eat like this, so he's doing it only today. So it's not a question. It is entirely permissible for Reb Zera to have taken off such a big piece. All right. Rav Ami Rav Asi, Rifta de Ruva, when Rav Ami Rav Asi would have the bread from a Ruva Chatzeris that they would do Erev Shabbos, as Rashi says. So they would also use it to make hamaitzi on Shabbos. They said, since we did already one mitzvah with it, we did a mitzvah of a Ruva Chatzeris, let's do the other mitzvah of it, namely the mitzvah of hamaitzi. So I have a question for you. Didn't we just say, we brought down in Taisus this idea of ein oisim mitzvahs chavilas chavilas? So you shouldn't make mitzvahs into packages. We literally just said that in the Taisus, and now we're saying that it's an ideal. You should take the matzah that you did at Ruva Chatzeris and make hamaitzi on it. Use it for hamaitzi. Isn't that a problem of ein oisim mitzvahs chavilas chavilas? No one asked the question. No one asked this question. So I'd like to share with you why not. In order to understand why not, I think that you first have to understand that there's two types of mitzvahs chavilas. One type is the Gemara tells us in beginning of Saita. The Gemara tells us on Saita on Daf Ches that ein oisem mitzvahs chavilas. Therefore, you're not going to be mashkin base Saitas together. You're not going to be mitar and shtei mitzayron together. You're not going to be doing ritzua in the avodim. You're not going to do two together. You're not going to be erev two agolas together. Certainly, you're not going to do together. Why? Because Einayt submisses chavilas. The more of his question over there, what happens if you have a saita? She's very nervous. She's shaking. Can you have her drink with another saita? Fine. But fundamentally, Einayt submisses chavilas. We're not going to. Right? We say when it's a nice thing in arv simcha b'simcha. Right? Why not? It's a certain muscle. You're just like chaplap. You need to hurry, get all the things together. Right? How does this fit with the fact that you're allowed to marry 100 women at one time? Right? Forget but let's put that on the side. But fundamentally, you shouldn't be looking to what do they call it in work, in corporate work? They always tell you they want to have performance be up, the best. So what do they say? That in order to maximize the performance, right, they're trying to make sure that you don't have to do any extraneous tasks. So anything extraneous, you should be able to get rid of. Why? Maximize the performance. Maximize your time. No, we don't say that. If he has a few citrus to drink, each one is going to be separate. There is potentially exceptions. Like if you have a few kahanim, then doing it at the same time is not considered necessarily chavilas. But if you have one kahan giving a whole bunch of women to drink at the same time, that's called chavilas. Fine. But then there's another type of chavilas, and that is the Gemara tells us in Psachim. The Gemara tells us in Psachim on Kuftes that we have daled kaisis to kini rabbanon derecheres kol chad v'chad mitzvah b'nafshe. The aim is starfin zelazeh. The Gemara says you're not allowed to make the arba kaisis be mitzdarf. In other words, you want to make the first kais of kiddush. You're not going to drink from it. You're going to keep it for the next kais, right? On after Magid, right? The idea there that you don't want to it's not forget the aspect of it that you have to drink, otherwise it might be considered brachot. Let's put that on the side. But you can't use the same kais to make the other bracha. Why? Because it's essentially being ice and mitzvahs chavilas. Chavilas, you're essentially taking the two and being mitzdarif them to do two mitzvahs with one kais. And that seems like it's a burden for somebody, right? And in fact, the Gemara is clear that this is also more there. I'm talking about Kufbeis. Ein am shtei kedushos al kos echad. Why? Because ein osim mitzvahs chavilas. So in this situation, it's not a vort of two different people doing the same mitzvah. It's it's the same kais doing two different mitzvahs out of it. We also say the same idea of ein osim mitzvahs chavilas. They're not the same, but it's the same principle, which is you are in a rush, you're in a hurry, you want to be maximizing your performance, your time. So it's just the easiest, it's just the best. Use the same wine for all the different brachas. Use the same kayan to give all the saitas to drink. All the, like we're not looking for maximal performance. So why not over here? Why over here is it different? That we would say that when it comes to a situation of the Eruv Chaseris, and by the way, there is a obviously a discussion if you do every Chaseris every Shabbos or once a year. Let's assume for the moment that that's not necessarily our topic, just whichever one it was. That he's saying that you could it's a mitzvah to do to make use it for hamaitzi. It seems to me that it's not a vort here in the same as those. That you can make an nafkamina between the two. What's the nafkamina? In the situation where a person is having two saitas in front of him, it's not a vort that he is doing one mitzvah with this saita, and then he's doing the repeat of the same mitzvah with this next saita. What he's looking to do is he's already finished this, he's given this saita to drink. This saita is done. This mitzvah is done now with this saita. The fact that he wants to now give another saita to drink is he was looking to do another mitzvah, and it's optimal for him to be able to put the two together. In a situation where somebody has a cup of wine and he's made one bracha, it's like, I'd like to make another bracha on it as well. Why? Because it's going to be optimal for me to make two brachas on it, save myself from having more wine. So in those situations, we say it's a chavilas. You're looking to maximize your performance on something. You have another mitzvah to do, and therefore it's best for you to utilize this. But if somebody is in a situation where they have other wine, they have other other lechem mishnah, and this matzah, this challah, whatever that was used for the erev, it's now no longer going to be utilized at all. Now it will just be finished. It will be just eaten or not. So in order to be able to enhance it, to be able to give it another shot in life, so you use it for another mitzvah. That is to say, you're not doing this because of a masoi. Your attitude here is to try to become another mitzvah with this thing so that it has another utilization, another shot to do something with it. That's why potentially we can make an afkamin and say why this is not chavilas, and would have massive ramification in halacha. In other words, if it's a situation where chavilas is potentially going to be impacted in terms of the kavana of the person, what the person is doing in their intention. Therefore, if a person's intention is to maximize performance, then we have a chavilas issue. If a person's intention is in order to be able to utilize something for a mitzvah that otherwise would be neglected, it would not have any usage of it, so maybe then it wouldn't have the same problem. I'm saying that b'derech efshin. Again, I didn't see anyone discuss it. Okay, continues the Gemara. We are now on Mem Amen Aleph. Amar Rav, Tol Baruch. It's an interesting sugya where somebody, this is the new sugya, right? Where you wash your hands. You ever have somebody who's not religious come to your house for a meal, and he's wondering why we're saying new. Everybody's talking to each other in this kind of very non-verbal way. So Rav says that you're allowed to say, once you made your bracha of hamaitzi, you're allowed to say to the people sitting around the table, no, take this, make your bracha, eat. You're allowed to say that that's not considered a hefsek and would not necessitate making another hamaitzi. Says Rashi told Baruch Abitzeh Kadam Shetam Min Aprusa, the one who made the bracha of Hamaitzi before he himself eats from the broken piece, is able to make to take a piece and give it to whoever's next to him by the table. The Armalei told him Prusas Habracha, no, eat from the challah. Even though he's talking, ain't sarch lachsul levarach. It doesn't have to make another bracha. The afa gav the sicha behefsek. Even though normally we say that sicha is a hefsek, for example, the Gemara Menachos Lam Vav tells us that somebody who's sachbein tefillah, somebody who's talking in between putting on the tefillin sheyad and tefillin sherash is considered to be a hefsek, and therefore he has to make another bracha. Nevertheless, this is hach sicha tzarich bracha of lo mefsek, and this is considered tzarich of the meal of the hamaitzi, and therefore it's not considered a hefsek. So Amarav told Baruch, and it's tzarich levarach. Have melach, have liftin. But if you said, bring me the salt, or bring me the liftin is the other dips or relish or whatever, so then tzarich levarach. Then you would have to make another bracha, because that would be considered a hefsek. Says Rashi, haviu melach, right? If the to bring the salt, I'm sorry. Let's just first do a Birchman. Birchman Amar Afilu Haviyu Melach Haviyu Lifter Nami Ein Tzarich Levarach. But even Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Rabbi Yochanan says that no, if a person says bring the salt, that's not considered to be a situation where you're making a hefsek. Says Rashi, why not Shavzu Tzarich Bracha? This is also considered Tzarich of the Bracha. The Prusa Shal Bracha Nechalas Batam, so that you should be able to have the bread being eaten with a certain taste. Then the Gemara continues, Gabel Atayre. If somebody says, he washed, and he's saying to the people, the shamish, the eved, whoever is there, go feed the cows. So tzarich levarach. Then he has to make another bracha because he interrupted. Rav Shei says he doesn't have to make another bracha because when he's saying to go feed the cows, that's not considered a hefsek. Because Rav Yehuda Marav says, it's forbidden for a person to eat before he gives his food to his animal. We say every day in the Shema. Right, the Pasuk says, who's coming first? The first is coming the food in the field for the animals, and then it's going to say you eat. So you have to give your animals food before you. So therefore, it's not a problem to say after you washed by the meal to say go feed the animals. That's not considered a hefsek. That's not considered a problem according to this last opinion from Rav Sheshes. I just want to point out before we go any further that this topic is of being able to interrupt the meal before to feed the animals before you eat, before you made the bracha, and maybe not necessitating you to have to make another one. So if you look here on the various different pages on the side, etc., the Rif has a girsa, and the Mesorah Shah says, and instead of saying Yehuda Marav, it says Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel. As we said, he's a student of both. The Rosh has a girsa Amar of Huna Marav, either way. And on the side of the Ein Mishpat, it says, then in Gittin, it says that it's not also for a person to be yoichal kaidim she'item ma'achal behemtoi. Rather, it's also for a person to be toyim at she'item ma'achal behemtoi. Right? So yoichal means to eat a meal. To be toyim means just to even taste anything before you give your animals to eat. So I wanted to point out 2 points. One is that we bring this down the halacha. The idea that gabel atayre, if you after you washed and you have a dog or whatever, you say to the cleaning lady, go feed a dog, and you have somebody at the table. Well, maybe they're wondering why you have a dog. That's a separate topic. But they're saying, they're wondering why you're talking. Aren't you supposed to say no? Like nobody's supposed to talk. They say, no, we're animal rights specialists. You're allowed to say, go feed the animals. No problems. That's totally fine. Yeah, that is totally fine. That is brought down in halacha. That's black letter law. You're allowed to say, feed the animal before you make hamaitzi. No question on that. However, what's interesting to me is that this halacha of asal adam sheyechal kadem she'item ma'achal behemtoi, that's not brought down. That's not brought down as halacha. The fact that it's not a hefsek between you don't have to make another bracha when you interrupt before you make hamaitzi to say go feed the animals. That is a halacha. But the fact that it's also to feed the animals, that it's also to eat before you feed the animals, that's not brought down as a halacha. Why not? So my argument, I don't have any proof for it, but my argument is that this halacha, which is brought down here, is a Buddha Marav. If you look in Gittin, in Samach Beis over there, is brought down actually the name of Geneva. Remember, we had earlier in the Masechta, we talked about Geneva, and mentioned a little bit about him, that he had a bit of an interesting, colorful life, right? In the end, he was killed. He was killed because he got into a fire with Mar Ukva, a whole Maisa. But if you remember, we talked about in the beginning of the fourth parak, we discussed that on Chav Zayin, the Rav Ikul Bei Geneva, Rav came to Geneva's house, V'tzol Shal Shabbos Be'erev Shabbos, and he davened for Friday night. He davened it early. So we said Geneva is a bit of a colorful life story. So over there in the Gemara in Gittin, it's brought down this halach in the name of Geneva, saying in the name of Rav. So maybe we don't want to bring down too many halachas in the name of Geneva. Maybe that's why we don't bring it down as a halacha. And over here, if you look in our Gemara, look in the back, you'll see the Rif brings down the halacha, but the Rif is bringing it down as Rabbi Yehuda is saying in the name of Shmuel. So for him to bring it down as a halacha, it's not a problem because it's halacha the name of Shmuel, and it's not nothing to do with Geneva. Geneva only when he brought down Shas, he brought down Shas a number of times, only bringing down halacha the name of Rav. That's perhaps why we don't bring it down. One additional point just mentioned is what about drinking? We're talking here about eating, maybe even tasting. What about drinking? So in terms of drinking, by the way, this halacha is I should mention. I didn't give you the full story. When I say it's not brought down, I mean it's not brought down in like the Shulchan Aruch, but it is brought down by others that do say that it is in fact an isser to eat before your animals. The Marami Rutenberg writes in the Tshuva in Shin Beis, Simon Shin Beis. He said it's mamish isser d'oraisa. The Shvus Yaakov Michael Gimel says that it's the isser d'Rabbanan. But either way, this is a serious. Some people say that it is in fact a major isser to eat before your animals. So again, the question was, why does Shulchan Aruch, why don't they bring it down? That's my potential answer. Fine. What about drinking? So drinking is that the same thing? Because the language here in the Gemara is about eating, not necessarily about drinking. So I thought I'd just mention to you that in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, it says the following: U'shasiya ha'oidem kaidem. When it comes to drinking, a person comes before the animal. What's the raya from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch? His raya is because the pasuk says in Parshas Chayesara that when Yitzchak came, when the Eved of Avram came to marry a wife for Yitzchak, so what did he say? He said the girl is going to be the right girl. Is going to say v'gam l'gmalecha ashka, that you should drink, and then for the animals you should drink. So therefore, you see the humans came before the animals, and the Eved was willing to take the drinking before the animals drank. So therefore, it's a raya that the humans come first when it comes to drinking. I would just mention that if you look in the Orach Chaim there in Chayesar, the Orach Chaim, I don't think this agrees with this. I mean, I'm not proving it la halacha, but I don't think he agrees. Why? Because if you look at the Orach Chaim over there says that the reason that Rivka was giving the person to drink, the Eved and his the people, the entourage, before giving the camels, was because that was a situation where they had just traveled a whole long distance and they were very thirsty. So when it comes to a situation of tsar, even if it's not sakana, then of course the human comes before an animal's tsar, and that's the reason why. So it wouldn't necessarily be a raya that if there was no tsar, that it would be permitted to drink before the animals drink. Either way, all right, we have to move on. Says the Gemara. So now we have a bunch of interesting mamarim that come from Rava Bar Shmuel. Now the first one relates to us because of the salt. But the rest of them are not relevant necessarily. But the reason that we bring them down is because we bring down all the places of Rav Bar Shmuel and Shas. We're bringing down 3 of the places right here. The only other place is once in Sukkah, randomly, and one other time, which we had in Brachos. Who remembers? We had in Brachos Chav Beis. You remember Rav Bar Shmuel? There was a story over there. Rav Papa, Rav Huna Bar Yeshua, they were like hanging around, and the question was who should bench. And each one was saying, well, in terms of their Torah status, who had Kedimus in benching. So Rav Bar Shmuel was in that story. That's it. The only other places in Shas we have. Okay, continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Bar Shmuel Mishum Rav Chia. Ein abaytzei rashoy liftzoy ad sheyaviu melach or lifton. When a person is making a maitzi, he's not permitted to make a maitzi until they first bring him melach. He has to first have some sort of a relish, a dip, salt on the table. Lifnei kol echad ve'echad. He has to have that on the table. Rava Bar Shmuel Ikla Lebei Reish Galusa. Rava Bar Shmuel came to the house of the Reish Galusa. Afikulei Rifta. So they brought him some bread. He's obviously chashav a guy, right? He's eating by the Reish Galusa, so they bring him some rifta. They bring him some bread. Who bought a lahedja, and he ate and he made a hamaitzi and he didn't wait for the salt. So Amalei, how the Mar Mishmaitze, right? Mamte Darshan in every story. So the Reish Galusa says, well, one second, you're the guy who says that you have to have salt or some relish. So how could you make hamaitzi without having it? Did you change your mind? Amarlo less than tzarich b'sheish. He says, no, I didn't need it when this is delicious bread. Baishish, right? Parshas Kisisa, right? The Bayar Ki Baishish Shmaisha. It says you don't have to wait when you have such good bread like you guys. You're the Reish Galusa. You're politically connected. You guys have the really nice bread. You have real pasnikia. So of course we don't need to wait to be able to get the salt. So that is Rav Bar Shmuel now telling us that it depends. It depends on the kind of bread that you have. Now we have to do Taisus before we move on. Taisus is very interesting. Taisus, the top Taisus on the page. Taisus tells us, "V'chein halach." I'm skipping there the second line. V'chein halach imsach ben berachas hamaitzi lachila. If somebody talks between hamaitzi and eating, uben berachas kiddush l'sio between kiddush and drinking, tzorich la'achzil. They really have to make another bracha again. Ilav milsha the shaychal suda, unless they're specifically doing something that has specifically to do with the suuda. Now I'm skipping a few lines. Taisa says the narrow lines, about 5-6 lines now. Taisa says we don't have a custom to bring on our tables salt or other relishes because our pasta is really good. Now, this is very fascinating, right? Reality of the time. Tais is saying, at least this is one of the Bala Tais, that he doesn't have salt on his table because they have really passed chashiv. And then what the Gemara is going to say in a second, less than when you have really good bread, you don't have to have salt. Tell that next time to your wife, this Shabbos, when she makes chal, you're not having salt at the table, and she's like, run to the answer, no, chal doesn't need salt. You're like, what? You do something that's not according to Judaism. No, delicious bread that you made doesn't need to have salt, right? But then continues Taisus, another reason why we have to have salt on the table, and this is practically why, even though your wife makes delicious bread and you don't need to have salt at the table, nevertheless, we still have to have salt. Why? Says Taisvis, and this is Lamaisa relevant. Again, Rabbi Menachem, I'm not sure this is the same Rabbi Menachem from Vienna or not. He doesn't quote him from Vienna this time. And he says, Mihu Rabbi Menachem, medaktik ma'oy lavi melach al shukh medis memenish kis shol yeshon al shukh mamtin zeh ashili dem vein beloy mitzvahs hasan mekatregel and veris melach magen alayim. Why do you have to have the salt on the table? Because the Yidden are sitting there at the table and they don't have what? They don't have anything to do, and everybody's saying they're new, and everybody's not doing anything, and they're not learning, they're not being Isaac and mitzvahs, and everybody's waiting, and the wife's late, and so the son's been mekatric. So therefore, have the salt on the table, and it's going to be Megan. Why? Because it's a reminder of the bris melach. Fine, that's Rabbeinu Menachem tells us why we have to have salt on the table, even if mitzvah halacha the bread could be eaten without salt. The best way to urinate is while you're sitting. Why? Because then it'll be totally, the kiluach will be finished. No, Rav Kana is even on loose earth, and it will also be able to be finished. A person will not be in a situation where they will have drops coming inside of their clothing. One of somebody's lacking this kind of a loose earth, and then it should stand in a high place and urinate to a low place, and then also he will be able to be confident that he could wait until the end, and then it won't get into their clothing. Fine. Another lesson from Rav Shmuel. When you finish eating, eat salt. And after you're drinking, make sure you drink some water. And you won't get harmed. You'll be nice and healthy. Make sure you have some salt after the meal, and make sure you have some water after you finish drinking. And you won't get hurt. Another version of this is if somebody ate and they did not have salt, or they drank and they did not finish off with water, so that by the day they should be worried about having bad breath, and at night they should be concerned about askra. Askra is a bad death. The Gemara told us earlier in Brachot Ches that askra is the worst type of death. So salt and after your meal and water after your meal is very healthy. Again, whether or not these things are part of the whole Rafus saga, and whether or not the Rafus of Chazal, why they don't work anymore, is part of that or not, I don't know, but I'm not accustomed to anybody who's having salt after their meal. Certainly in terms of In terms of people having water to drink, yes, but the salt I haven't seen. So somebody who's gonna wash down their food with a lot of water, he's not gonna have he's not gonna have intestinal problems. The kama, how much of that? A ketan of water for the amount of food that somebody's eating. Somebody who has adashim, somebody who has beans, once every 30 days is going to be good for their intestines, going to prevent this asker death. But having beans every day is bad. My time is it's bad for the breath. Interestingly, that Rashi says, how's Mainea Askara? How's Adashim Mainea Askara? Shechil b'machmas Isur b'nei because this Askara comes back because people have intestinal issues, blockages. V'Adashim mishalshalim, and Adashim give you shilshul. What I don't understand is why doesn't it say Avakol Yem Eloy my time b'shem the shilshul? Right? That we don't say. We just say it's because of kosher for rechapet. Right? Either way. If somebody has mustard every 30 days, basically keeps away problems from his house. But having every day chayrdol is not good. My time the kosher it's going to give you heart problems. Somebody has a lot of little fish, sardines, and maybe or something like that. Some little fish is going to take you away again. Intestinal disease, and not only that, Marvin it makes a person very healthy. Fine, having little fish, very, very healthy. That's very much part of a Mediterranean diet. Anybody if somebody has ketzach is not going to have problems with heart disease. Again, what is ketzach? I'm not sure. Rashi says anishamati. I heard it's a type of zeroim, type of thing which they plant in the Arab lands. But Rav Shimon Gamliel says, but ketzach is one of the terrible things. It's like 1/60th of simani mavis. Somebody who's sleeping near a barn where it's wafting in the smell of this ketzach is going to his blood is on his own head. Like the time makes you healthy, the reach makes you sick. The mother of Yirmiyah would smear him a bread with this ketzah because it was very healthy, the tab, but then she would like take it off so that he would have the tab but not the smell. Fine, we'll have to stop over here.